Assalamualaikum. Salam hamba hulur tanda ingatan. Hi everybody. My name is Daniel Zamri. So today I will present about overlearning and learning motor skills. Alright. Before we dive deeper into the topics of overlearning motor skills, we need to understand what the term means. Overlearning can be defined as the continuation of practice beyond the amount needed to achieve a certain performance criterion. For example, when you want to excel in something, you need to practice. To put it in the context of physical activity, practitioners who wish to improve their ability in performing certain motor skills need to practice on go through overlearning. However, before going through with the overlearning process, there are a few things that practitioners have to keep it in mind and perform. This is what called as practice overlearning conditions. These conditions are set up to make sure that the session can help to bring optimal results and not harm the practitioner's body and mind. Okay, the first condition is practitioner has to determine the amount of time for each activity in each session. Before going straight into performing the activities, practitioners have to lay out the time schedule. When doing so, it is important that you know your own capabilities and strength. Overworking yourself and exceeding the time limit that you can endure can be harmful to your body. The second condition is to determine the amount of rest between each activity in each session. Resting is vital part of any physical activity. After exerting your strength and effort in performing the task, you need to let your body relax before starting the next activity. This is to allow your energy to recharge, which can help you to perform the next activity in a better shape and condition. We move to the third condition, which is practitioner has to determine the length of each session. It is important not to confuse between activity and session. In each session, there will be a series of activities. The amount of time taken to complete the series of activity in one session should be into consideration with the same reason of saving the practitioner from harming themselves due to lack of energy and fatigue. Practitioners need to be aware of their own strength and how much and how long they can endure in completing the session in one sitting. For the last condition is to determine the amount of time between session. Like I mentioned just now, performing one session involves completing a series of activities. Hence, to perform the session back to back with a proper amount of time for the practitioner to test and again regain their energy is not advisable. As much as overlearning can do us good, it can be also harmful if it is not done properly, especially when time for resting is not properly allocated. Overlearning is done to improve our retention performance as it helps the muscle and body to adapt to the amount of effort in performing the activity, making it easier for the activities to be done as time passes. To prove the relationship between the practice of learning and retention, Riskerl, Willis, and Copper 1992 analyzed and reviewed 15 research studies related to this very topic. According to their finding, it can be indicated that the higher the percentage of practice, which is overlearning, the higher the retention performance. To put it simply, it means that overlearning has a positive influence on retention performance. As we are all already aware, overlearning is a handy way to lock in your hard-earned skills. To put in the context of physical activities, one of the skills in which overlearning can be applied to is the procedural motor skills. Procedural motor skills start with the procedural memory. Procedural memory is a part of the long-term memory that is responsible for knowing how to do things, also known as motor skills. Procedural memory is a part of the long-term memory that is responsible for knowing how to do things, also known as motor skills. Procedural skills is a combination of cognitive, which is memory, and motor components. After we retain the information on how to do simple tasks like walking, running, jumping, and talking, we perform them. This action is called procedural motor skills. The next skill is a dynamic balance skill. Dynamic balance skill can be defined as the ability to balance oneself while moving. Examples of the actions are tumbling, which is regularly performed in acrobatic, coming to a stop after running, dodging, and climbing. This can be tricky to some individuals as not everyone has good balance. Overlearning and learning this skill can help those individuals in improving the related skills. The concept of dynamic balance skill involves weight transfer. It can be done by shifting the body weight on one foot to another. Another way is by shifting the body's weight from the feet to the hand and back. As a physical education teacher, you may be required to conduct a class which consists of overlearning motor skills. How can you do it? I will give you an example of how to conduct the class by explaining the overlearning strategy. Alright, here is the strategy. Number 1, this activity is done to demonstrate the presence of diminishing return, which include two-step football punt. The class will be divided into 5 groups, and each group will be assigned at each station. There are 5 stations altogether. The number of the stations depends on the number of the groups. Each station involves a different part of the two-step football punt. Alright, number 2. Each group will practice punting the ball in their station for 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, each group will rotate to another station. Okay, for the number 3, each group practice the entire 25-minute punting, 5 minutes in each station. Task cards are used to describe skills being learned are used.
Thank you, Faris Daniel. Assalamualaikum and a very good evening to Madam Ani and my fellow friends. I, Muhammad Iman bin Misnan, as the second presenter, we continue with the next topic. The second topic is distributed practice. The definition of distributed practice is a learning technique where practice occurs in multiple short sessions over a long period of time with an acceptable amount of space between each session. For example, studying something during two different sessions with a break of a few days or even an hour in between, rather than learning it all in one go. According to Lee and Genevieve's 1988 distributed schedule lead to better learning than mass schedule for learning continuous motor skill. Distributed practice schedule is the amount of rest between practice session or trial are relatively long. As you can see in this graph, distributed practice contain rest and practice where time for rest is longer than practice. Next, how to qualify this practice? To qualify as distributed practice, each learning session must focus on the same subject. Teacher may prefer this alternative method instead of the common method, which is linear approach, where the teaching style is the content repeatedly in a short time before introducing to the next subject or the next skill. Distributed practice is a well-known theory in cognitive psychology that used in a wide range of disciplines, from improving memory to physical activity. And more recently, this practice has grown in popularity among academic educators and coach. So to get it more clear, you can split it up into a part. So where the distributed is about spread out, practice is to do something repeatedly so as to become proficient. The spread out aspect explain why distributed practice can also be referred to as spaced practice, spaced learning, or spaced repetition. Next slide is how distributed practice work. An effective distributed practice in education need to follow these 4 steps. The first step is initial mastery, where students are introduced to the material and achieve a baseline understanding of the topic. Second, spacing, where a considerable amount of time pass after the material is first learned. Third, retrieval, where student must retrieve the previous learned information from memory during a new learning session. The lastly is repetition, where the process is repeated and material is relearned over several sessions. Think of this learning technique like set of a workout. You need a break in between to gain the full benefit, reduce fatigue, and develop important muscle group, or in this case, the skill. Another example is in initial mastery, you learn the first technique in smashing in the badminton. Next, spacing, where the rest time is come out. Third, retrieval, before you move to the next smash technique, you will retrieve or revise the previous technique in smashing in a badminton. Lastly, repetition. This cycle is being repeat after you can master all the smash technique in badminton. Next slide is, at this point, you are probably asking one of the following question. The first question is, how long should the break be? The answer, experts say that the optimal gap between learning session is about 10 to 30% of the retention interval. What is retention interval? Retention interval is the length of the time you want student to remember the information. For example, If you were preparing a team for a competition in the next month, the ideal spacing would be around 6 days. Question is, how many learning sessions should there be? The answer is depend on us in a few factor, which is the factor is how much are you trying to learn or teach, how soon is the test or end of the learning period, and what your overall goal. By answering the few factor or answering the question carefully, it will help you to come with a reasonable plan that complement what educator plan to teach. The physical education subject might naturally demand more learning session than others, so it's important to carefully consider the question above. Next is, when this distributed practice work. For your information, distributed practice work for discrete skill, continuous skill, open skill, and closed skill. Discrete skill have a clear, defined, and identifiable beginning and end. Discrete skill are simple, well-designed movement such as throwing and kicking a ball, a short putt, discus or javelin throw, or a samosa. Next, continuous skill. Continuous skill have no distinct, identifiable beginning or end. The skill is repeated continuously, unbroken, with the beginning and the end of the skill being determined by the performer opposed to the skill itself. Continuous skill tend to be learned the faster due to their repetitive nature. Example of continuous skill include swimming, jogging, skipping, and walking. For the open skill occur in unpredictable and constantly changing situation. For example, during competitive team sport where players have a direct opponent, such as netball, soccer, rugby, and water polo. Open skill are dependent on external factor, for example, timing, the placement of the skill, weather, skill level of opponent and spectator. Therefore, this factor outside the immediate control of the player. Open skill are often difficult for beginner and cognitive learner due to increased external distraction, causing focus to be easily lost. However, autonomous learner and experienced player are often at an advantage using open skill because they can use knowledge from the past experience. Lastly, closed skill. Closed skill occur in a familiar and stable environment. For example, during team and individual practice and training session. Closed skills are often self-paced, making them useful for learning new skills as there are minimal external distraction. However, it is imperative that players adapt to changing, unpredictable environment to develop as an athlete. When it works, there is no exact number because shorter and more sessions are better than longer and fewer. Next, we go to the benefit of distributed practice. There are 8 benefits that I want to share with you guys. The first benefit is research favor this method for effective learning outcome rather than other method. Second is effective for long-term retention and learning continuous tasks which we will repeat from the first skill until the end of the skill. Next, it take less time to learn the same amount of information, and thinking require memory retrieval, leading to more complex thought process. Other than that, distributed practice also less tiring and allow for mental and physical recovery. It also leave time for feedback and self-reflection for players. And Lastly, better overall learning in the same amount of time spent studying. So there has 8 benefit of distributed practice. Now we go to the next slide. You all have know the benefit. Now let's move on to drawback of distributed practice. The first is might take longer to learn simple and distinct skill. For example, you learn simple skill in badminton which is forehand drive. So it might take longer you in performing or mastery the forehand drive skill. Second is require more time and dedication, and also increasing in the risk of negative transfer. Lastly, whichever practice you use or we can use when in the future as a future teacher, it depends on the desired outcome and how much learning there is to do. In school setting, distributed practice is typically a smarter choice. It helps students remember things they need to know all years long so they can build upon prior knowledge. That's all from me. I will pass this presentation to Fakhrul Helmi. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum and good evening to everyone. My name Fakhrul Helmi Beroslan. I will continue the next slide. Maths. According to Lee and Genovese 1988, maths practice result in better learning for discrete motor skill. The definition of maths practice schedule is the amount of rest between practice session or trials in very short or none at all. Imagine you are teaching a class how to find the volume of a rectangle prism. You will typically show your student how to do it. Then you will have your student do it themselves. This is known as math practice as there is no gap between practice session. You may also give them a few practice questions for homework. This is agreeably still math practice as there is only a small gap between practice session. Math practice is quite common in many classrooms. Math practice has advantage and disadvantage. They have 2 advantages and 2 disadvantages. The first advantage is efficient. Second, capable helping a student pass an exam. And the disadvantages, it is not a great long-term solution. Second, information memorized this way is very likely to be forgotten once the exam is over. This is the differentiation of math practice and distributed practice. For math practice, a practice schedule in which the amount of rest between practice sessions is very short. For distributed practice, a practice schedule in which the amount of the rest between practice sessions or trials is relatively long. The difference is for math practice, they have short rest. For distributed practice, they have long rest. So, the example of math practice is identify basic shape for 20 minutes in one day. Distributed practice, identify basic shape for 10 minutes during session scheduled several times per week. The length and distribution of math and distributed practice. A math schedule will have fewer practice sessions than a distributed schedule. Each math practice requiring an or longer practice. A distributed schedule will distribute the same amount of practice time across more sessions. So, the rest interval between trial of math and distributed practice. A math schedule will have either no rest or a very short rest interval between trials. A distributed schedule will have much longer rest intervals than a math schedule. What works better? So, Distributed practice are better for learning than mass practice. They have three hypotheses for support the distributed practice are better than mass practice. First, fatigue hypothesis. Second, cognitive effort hypothesis. Third, memory consolidation hypothesis. Fatigue hypothesis. Why is the fatigue hypothesis a reason for better learning in distributed practice session? The learner will fatigue in mass practice schedule. Due to fatigue, the learner ability to accurately judge position during acquisition was affected. Furthermore, fatigue interfered with optimizing task-specific memory, which was demonstrated by reduced performance during retention and transfer block. Second, why is the cognitive effort hypothesis a reason for why distributed practice session is better for learning? The answer, after practicing for a certain amount of time in a mass schedule, the learner may get bored and lose interest. Will lower cognitive effort. Third, why is memory consolidation hypothesis a reason for why distributed practice session better for learning? To learn a skill, learner need to more time to process what he or she has learned without practicing. Distributed practicing allow better memory consolidation, which is strengthen memory. Thank you. That's all from us. If you have any question, you can ask.